So today I have with me on Architecture Unbound podcast, Yara, and I'm going to allow her to introduce herself now.
Hi, so I'm Yara. I'm from Cairo, from Egypt, and I'm still a student. I study in a university called the German University in Cairo. It's not really German, I think it's Egyptian, but we just have some foreign professors from like different countries all over the world. It's actually fun. I'm in my last year. I finished my graduation project, but we have like an extra year where we just it's like a pre-master's year in a
Okay.
way. And I majored in urban design and architecture. In my seventh semester, in my fourth year, in the beginning of my fourth year, I decided that in Egypt, there aren't really any Instagram accounts or communities for architecture students or design students. So I decided let's create a small like page at least where I create content because I really, really enjoy content creation. And then it was really fun. Like I realized day after day that people really want this. People really need it. And it's like, baby steps, but it's really nice.
Yeah, awesome. So you are in your semester between right now?
Yeah, you can call it that. It's just a weird system because with the German curriculum, it's just 4 years of architecture. But in Egypt, in order to have a license, it's 5 years. So they give you like an extra year of electives and design studios just so that you have the fifth year. Just consider it like a pre-master's because you major in some stuff.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's similar to how it is here in the US. So
Okay.
we have the 4-year bachelor degree, and
Okay.
then you have to go get your master's. But the school I went to had a 1-year master's program. So in 5 years, I did my bachelor's and my master's. And now I'm able to go and we have a bunch of tests we have to take in order to actually become like a licensed architect.
Okay.
So there's 6 tests they have us take over here. And we have to have like 3,600 hours in the field broken up in between all of the 6 categories that they test us on. So we go through all the schooling and then we're not actually architects, like we're architectural designers. So I'm just curious if that is similar in Egypt or if you just go through schooling and then you can consider yourself an architect.
Yeah, I think like you just graduate and then you can literally do anything. But like actually, eh, you have to like for 3 years work in an office in a
Mm-hmm.
certain level. Like you can't just start your own office.
Yeah.
According to how many years you've worked and how many years you've been licensed, you can then start your own office or have certain like positions or roles in companies. But yeah, technically you can be an architect.
When you say licensed, do you get licensed when you graduate, or is that something you have to apply for
You
after the
apply
fact?
for it. Yeah, you apply
Okay.
for it. And like if you travel abroad, you cannot have the Egyptian license.
Interesting. So you are concentrated in urban design. What do you love the most about urban design? What made you pick that as your niche in architecture?
I think I'm just really curious how cities work,
Mm-hmm.
and it still is very related to architecture because you still need the buildings and you still get to design them and design what the relations between them are. But I think it's because it's more public. Like cities and urban design is for everyone more than it is for a person who has
Yeah.
like some sort of privilege to get the a certain quality of architecture, but urban design is for everyone. Honestly, architecture should be for everyone too. It's not how the world works, you know.
Right,
But
right.
like
Yeah.
urban design is more like giving.
Mm-hmm. It's more community based, right? You're
Yeah,
designing
exactly.
something
Exactly.
for the good of the community that's a master plan for the whole community center as opposed to
Exactly.
someone's $1 million home.
Yeah.
How long have you been doing your Instagram page? Did you start it when you were younger and like just starting out, or is it something you've developed more recently?
I developed it like 2 years ago. I was like in my fourth, no, actually not 2 years ago, like a year and a half ago.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was when I started feeling more comfortable with architecture because I really, really struggled during my first two and maybe into the third year a bit. I felt more comfortable, but my first 2 years I really struggled and I almost like really hated it because it's not what I imagined it would be. And it was too stressful for me, to handle. So I just hated it so much. And I always say like I'm trying to post the things that I would have wanted to see
Yeah.
when I was like in my first year.
Yeah, I resonate with that a lot because I went through a similar experience. I found myself in architecture. I actually didn't know that architecture was what I wanted to do. I applied to the school that I went to, and I applied under a different major. And then at the last second, I switched to architecture. I'd always really liked like design and critical thinking and being creative. And I was like, well, let's just see what architecture is. And the first month I was like, I can't do this. This is so scary. This is way too much. Like, it was just that overwhelming sense of like, this is a lot. And I didn't create my Instagram page until after I graduated, but it was a lot of those same feelings of like, this is what I wish I had when I was in that position, because you just kind of feel like it's weird. It's a weird one because you have studio, that's what we call, I don't know
Yeah.
if it's the term worldwide, architecture studio.
Yeah.
But you have all these people that you're surrounded with who are going through the same experience as you, but it still feels so isolating just
Yeah.
because of like everyone's worked on their own project and has their own things that are going on. So I think just having these Instagram pages to like look at and be like, oh, look, like this is actually, I think it's been interesting for me because it's not actually even like a country thing, it's a worldwide thing. So that's something that I've been really noticing as I've started this page and started building relationships in the community, is that a lot of people are experiencing the same thing in every country. It's not, I thought for a while like, oh, this is just the United States education system at
Yeah.
play, like and then I started to talk to people from Canada, you from Egypt, people from India, from England, and it's like the experience is all the same. Like people feel the same everywhere. I just think it's so fascinating that it's one of those disciplines that has a lot of things translate no matter where you are in the world, and just being able to develop a community of people where you kind of just go to the page and be like, oh, here's a tip, oh, here's funny humor
Yeah.
about this. Like you feel a lot less alone. So I think it's amazing that a lot of people are creating spaces like that now, because it definitely was not around 4 or 5 years ago when I was in the depths of my architectural education.
Yeah, honestly, I feel like exactly like you said, this creation of like creating sort of a community is so important. And I've always seen it in like in the UK and England mostly, but also India. I don't know if there's a lot in like a lot of creators in the US, but there is literally none in Egypt. Not a single person I know. There are always people who post about architecture, but it's not really for architects, you know, it's like
Yeah.
more like for anyone. And I really hope that there would be more accounts like that, because at least it would even make it easier for me. And I always have this trouble of like this conflict of, do I want to post in Arabic or English? Because if I post in English, more people will understand, but the Egyptians, not all of them will understand. I'm still catering for like the very, very privileged people who speak second and third languages, you know. But then I decide to do both and I write a lot of subtitles, you know. But yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome, going the extra step like that. But it really matters, like especially if your whole goal when you set out to do this was to create a community Egypt based, right? So I think that it is definitely something that people will notice about you, is that you take the extra mile and you create content for both languages. Like that takes an extra step. So you said something at the beginning about how you were talking about in the beginning about how you almost gave up on architecture. And I was wondering if you would be open to sharing a little bit about what you expected out of architecture that made you disappointed, and then how you sort of overcame that, and now you're basically on your way to completing your education.
I think this is like many people struggled with the same thing, but like I used to excel so much when I was a high school student. Like I always got straight A's, you know, and then I got into architecture and everything was different. And I wasn't like that good,
Right.
compared to other
Yeah.
people.
I definitely resonate a lot with what you were saying. I also did really good in high school. And then I got to college and it was sort of like all of these people are so artistic and talented. And I'm not really that artistic. Like, I cannot draw something from my head.
Yeah.
I have to like look at things and critically think about them. And that was different than a lot of people that were there. A lot of people that were there were very artistic. So it definitely was a similar experience for me. And I think adapting to that and just sort of being okay with not being the best, right? Like
Yeah.
accepting that I don't have to be number one or top 10 to like the projects that I'm doing and to love the projects that I create at the end of the day.
Yeah. There's also like this issue of extreme, grind culture. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's really universal. Like, and I think professors kind of, enforce it. That you like they're always comparing between people. There's always this very toxic competition between people. And
Mm-hmm.
like it's not only that people tend to like push it too far, on their own selves, like when it comes to their own physical health or mental health, but it's also like they end up not really wishing people the best.
Mm-hmm.
But I think like as we grow older, we just realize that this was really not worth it. And this was just the culture manipulating us and the professors reinforcing it all. And I think we kind of grew out of it, all of us. Like we were trying to have fun, to enjoy the process, not just because in architecture, I always tell my friends this, we tend to enjoy the end of the end result, the exhibition with all our work, but we just hate the process so much.
Yeah.
And like we should enjoy it, it's not about, it's fine if we don't know what we're doing. It's just try to do
Mm-hmm.
it.
Right. That's a really good point. We are always pushing towards the end presentation. And then before you know it, it's over and you've done
Yeah.
5 years, like, and it's over. And it's just like, at the end of the day, was it really worth not sleeping for an A when I could have slept and
Yeah,
gotten a B? Like, who am I really trying to impress at the end of the day, right?
exactly.
Like, if I enjoyed my experience, completed my education successfully, regardless of the ranking or the grade, then I think that that is really what matters the most in hindsight. Like, I definitely was one of those people that really did care about how everything looked at the end. And like, I remember pulling some all-nighters, but I don't think I really got into that until like junior, senior year. I stayed away from them for a long time, honestly. Like, nothing's ever done. So it's like this hustle of trying to reach this end goal when in
Yeah,
reality, no matter how good you've done, they're still going to have critiques that you could have fixed, right? So it's like we're always striving for something that we almost always are going to miss just because of the nature of architecture studio culture, right? We're supposed to be critiqued on things. So I think that there's a lot of things that have to be relooked at in architectural education. I think that it's interesting that, again, it's one of those universal things and not just something that is country based, which I find really fascinating.
yeah,
And, we're probably a long way from changing anything, but just starting to talk about it and have conversations about it starts to just bring a level of awareness and
yeah, exactly.
allows people to know that like they're not alone and the things that they're feeling are valid. And I think that if that's what we can do to provoke change right now, then that's what we should do.
Yeah.
So what was it like for you when you decided that you weren't gonna necessarily give into the hustle culture of architecture? Or did it allow you to, I guess, fall in love with the process more?
Really started in like my fifth semester, which is like my third year. It started with me just not hating every single thing about architecture. This was
Okay.
literally the beginning, just not being so frustrated at everything. And
Mm.
then in my sixth semester, there was like a TA, it's how we call it, like a
Yeah.
tutor. And she was literally like so angelic. Like we're all in love with her. And then she just made us, just not hate our lives, basically.
Hmm.
in short. And like we started to enjoy it. Like she would tell us you have to do this and this and this. And it was like a long list of stuff that we have to do, but it would just feel like so good, you know, like, okay, I'll do
Hmm.
that for you. So it started like that. And then we started to enjoy the process. Like I remember saying something that's so peculiar. I told her like, oh my God, I'm so excited to design the facade. And I was like, what am I even saying? You know, I'm
Hmm.
excited to design something? That's weird. Should be, you know, pissed. You should be angry that you have to do something. And like, no, I was actually excited. And she was always telling me, wow, you're one of the most passionate people. And I was like, I'm passionate about architecture? That's so weird. But then, like, I think by the seventh semester, I was really enjoying it. And I
Hmm.
started to know what I like, what I don't like, the colors I'd rather use, you know, my style, my
Yeah.
visualization style. So it just all started falling in place. And I was just really enjoying everything. Although I really hated the professor so much.
Hmm.
He was like the worst professor ever that ever gave us any kind of studio. But then I was enjoying what I was doing. Like it was the first time that I didn't need the validation of a professor.
Yeah.
So, you know, I felt like, you know, just free in a way. And
Hmm.
then the eighth semester was my graduation project, and it was just really fun. Like everything about it was fun, and I loved the professor and I enjoyed what we were doing. So it gradually, you know, from just starting off by not hating everything, you know, just hating most of the things, it gradually transformed into enjoying the process and enjoying the results, even if it's difficult and even if I'm struggling, but I was enjoying the process. And I think that was really important.
Yeah. So was it your eighth semester where you had your Spain
Yeah.
abroad semester? Do you want to talk a little bit about that and the project that you were able to develop from that? Would you say that that's your favorite project?
Yeah, that was it. It has to be my favorite project, you know.
Hmm. Yeah.
We have like a professor in our university. Her name is Rita Pinto. She's so cute, okay? And she created this program where she takes like 20 students from Egypt to Barcelona,
Hmm.
where they work on an urban design project related to the city, related to Barcelona. So it was like really fun because we had to first analyze the city and read books about it, and you know it's a really rich place. It's history, in terms of history, in terms of like urban design and planning. So it was really eye-opening, especially that there's a shift, like there's a difference between how in Egypt we design our city and in Barcelona. So it was like it was really eye-opening. And then the process itself of like going on excursions to certain places, meeting the people, because and like going to like certain architectural offices there. We went to an architectural office of RCR, which are the only Pritzker Prize winners in Spain. And it was, you know, it's very different than how architects do it here in Egypt. So it's not just that it's fun and we're traveling, but it's also that it's so different.
Right. You're being exposed to an entirely different culture, an entirely different way of thinking about architecture.
Exactly.
So were you there a whole semester while you conducted the
Yeah, like
project?
around 6 months.
Oh, wow. That's a long time.
Yeah, because like we had like a few extra months that we weren't really doing anything. Like it was
Hmm.
an extra month that I stayed. So yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. I was able to visit Barcelona. I did my master's year, so my last year, my fifth year, the first month of our studies, they were all allowed to break off and pick where we want to go. So they offer different places, and I ended up going to Barcelona and Girona, but it was only for 10 days, but I loved it there. And I agree, like just being exposed to like those different places and the people and the history and the culture and like everything is so rich there. And like Barcelona is obviously known for being like such a urban city and like the way that it's
Yeah.
structured. So just going there and be able to see everything was so phenomenal. I'm so jealous you got to be there for 6 months. That is crazy. Even if I
Yeah.
wanted to stay there for 6 months, my US visa lets us stay there for 90 days. So,
But isn't there like a way to get like a longer visa?
I think you can if you're working there. So I
Okay.
also did a semester abroad before this. It was my senior year, so the year before. And our semester abroad was only Berlin, Germany. That's the only place we were able to go. And it was only for 90 days, like not a day more. It was the
Yeah.
90-day visas. Even though we were there for education and for school, we were only allowed again to be there for 90 days. But I did that full study abroad experience for the whole 3 months in Berlin, Germany. And yeah, that was definitely an amazing experience as well. Just being able to actually like live fully in another country. It really is mind blowing. Like just the way of life and how everything is different. Even like like on Sundays, I don't know how this if this is the same way in Egypt. I'd love to hear, but in Germany on Sundays like everything closes down and like
Yeah. I
nothing
realized
happens.
that. This is so weird, honestly. It never happens in Egypt, to be
It never
honest.
happens here either. It's not like that here. Like it's definitely very much like the American hustle culture, like just the way that it is here. But in Germany, it was like everything was so slow. Like even going out to eat, like we'd be with the teachers and they'd be like, okay, an hour lunch break. And we'd like be in the restaurant and everyone in the restaurant is so relaxed, like taking their time. The waiters are taking their time to get us our checks. And we're like, we have 10 minutes to be back or they're going to leave without us. We're like, come over here. We look like the hasty Americans, very on brand, but it was just very eye-opening that like everything is just so slowed down and like people are just really in the moment and like experiencing whatever they're doing, like fully present for it. And I love that. Like I am so eager to go back to any part of Europe. I just think traveling, it just opens our minds up so much to so many different things. And I would love to one day be able to like bring some of those things home to America and like have them be incorporated here. But yeah.
But like, how would you compare architecture in America with like architecture in Berlin or in Germany?
So the architecture here, so maybe it's because I'm so conditioned to like looking at it and knowing about it. Like we have a lot of historical monuments, but there's just something about the historical buildings in Berlin that were just so much more ornate almost. And I feel like the history and the culture is celebrated more in other countries. And like, I feel like in America, sometimes we don't necessarily give our past history like good light. So we don't shine a lot of light onto like a lot of historical things, like a lot of our historical monuments and things. And maybe this is just me being naive on what the historical representation of the things I was seeing in Germany. But I just feel like here, because I know the history, it's like a lot of things are not looked upon with the same like beauty and grace, or they just don't have as much detailings. And like it's almost like the history isn't as cherished in a way that it is in other countries. So when I
Yeah.
went to Germany and I lived there, I just felt like there was so much history that was preserved. Like even in the small town that I stayed in, it was like this small little city in Berlin, and it just had so much history and so much different cultures. And there was just like such a blend of people, and everyone was so supportive and community with each other. And I think that was also really nice to see, just because I feel like in America there's just a lot of division. So that was another thing that I really saw. And it just the way that they preserve their architecture and like really make it shine in their history, I think is really what made the difference for me. Like when I see American architecture, historical architecture, and being in Berlin, Germany, and seeing their historical architecture. Like it just felt so much more preserved and like cared for there. There was a level of intentionality towards their architecture than there is here. There's really not a lot of like intentionality, I feel like. Like if I were to think right now, what are the top 5 historical architecture places in the United States? I'm not even sure I could tell you. Like, I feel like a lot of like the hallmark places when people think of the United States are more like city destinations. Like people think of New York City and like LA. Like I feel like it's not necessarily history or architecture. It's more of like these like hot spots within the United States that people really think of. I'm not sure though. I'd be curious to know if they teach you about our historical architecture and if something even comes to mind when I say that.
I feel like the first thing that came to mind was like the Empire State Building
Okay.
and the High Line. And we're actually reading Delirious New York by Rem Koolhaas. Reading it for like an exam tomorrow, actually. And I think we actually studied a lot of architecture in the US, not necessarily as much as Europe,
Mm-hmm.
but like reflecting on what you said, I feel like every person who's from a certain city or who's from a country, just like you said, they kind of so used to what they're seeing, they do not even realize how special it is when someone else visits.
Yeah.
Like New York is a city, the way it was designed, the grid, the towers, it's known for the towers. Even if it kind of has like some negative consequences for the people actually living there, but it's just so iconic, everybody knows. And I think the US, maybe the reason you feel like there's more preserved architecture in Germany, for example, or in Europe, is because like their architecture started a while earlier.
Yeah.
And then during the war, they felt like they lost a lot. So they started preserving the stuff like really well.
That's a really good point. There was a lot
Yeah.
of like we would walk and there would be literally like bullet holes and bullet markings on the buildings.
You saw the stuff on the floor, the golden squares.
Yes, yes, yes. And like
So they
the
like
line of where the wall was, like they monumentalized those things
exactly.
in an effort to preserve them. And I feel like that is a good point about the timeline of things too, is like the country of Germany itself is so old and America is a newer country. And so
Yeah.
there it aren't as old buildings. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense when you think about it like that. I think that it's also a good point. Like you live in Egypt, do you see the pyramids often? Like I know I've seen like maps of the city and like they're incorporated into
Yeah.
a pretty urban setting, so you have a pretty good view of them. Just be curious of like that experience for you, because again, it's one of those things you become desensitized
Yeah.
to.
I remember when I was in Spain, I was talking to a friend from there, from Catalonia. And I was telling her, have you ever been to Sagrada Familia? Because I didn't get the chance to go there. And she was like, no, I haven't been there before. And I was like, you know what? I haven't ever been to the pyramids before. She was like, what? Haven't ever been to the pyramids? And I was like, yeah. And we just looked at each other like, we should visit. I actually visited the pyramids after coming back because I was like, that's such a shame, I need to see them. But like, yeah, they're pretty. And I think Cairo is an extremely complex city to study. Like, I would say it's pretty significantly easy to study European cities
Yeah.
or like New York because they have a system, there's a system.
Yeah, there's
like
a center, there's a
ex-
grid.
there's the Gothic center, the Roman area. So it's like the same. And then there's the modern urban fabric and how it integrates. So it's the same. Each city has like a special charm. But if you boil it down to like one main idea, there's a center and there's the expansion. And it's the same in Cairo. But then you find like there's a tremendous ton of like occupation that happened. And a lot of people occupied Cairo and Egypt. So there are like so many influences. It's crazy, The city is so layered. It's extremely difficult to study it. Like people from Europe and the US would come to Egypt just to try and understand what the hell is happening. And it's so difficult. It's so difficult to explain it or summarize it. But yeah, like just like you said, the pyramids are like there's the pyramids and around them like some sand, like desert, very small piece of land. I mean, relatively it's huge, but like it's small compared to But then around it there's like a lot of settlements and houses, and it's a pretty populated and dense area. But then you can find areas that are so luxurious, super privileged people. You can find gated communities. And it's something that a lot of people criticize here, that the modern urban, planners are trying to imitate the US in its design, which is a model that really does not work in Egypt, in Cairo. And it's failing like big time. But like we just, we're trying to copy the US or Dubai. And it's a really big problem because the cool areas in Cairo are like not, really being preserved well because of that. Or,
Right.
they're being like, I don't know how to say it in English, but like, stepped on or just trashed in a way.
Yes. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that that also goes back to what Americans do in general, is they do the same thing with their historical architecture, right? It's like this chase for like the new pretty building,
Modern
the modern
stuff.
building, the skyscraper, whatever Dubai is doing. And
Exactly.
so I live very close to Boston, which is a really well-known city, right?
Yeah.
So in Boston, it's a very dense city. And although there's so much historical buildings, it almost is so overpowered by these skyscrapers that surround them that it's like it takes away from that one historical building that they decided to preserve in the square, right? Like I remember walking through Boston and like looking around and like being in front of the historical building and just being like in awe of like all of the huge glass skyscrapers that were just literally surrounding it. And like they didn't touch it, right? They wanted to preserve it. But in doing that, these other things are so like overwhelming in their size compared to it that like there's no relationship between them. And then the overbearing brand new sparkly tower sort of overtakes the small historical town hall that they have saved, right? So it is unfortunate that people are looking to the United States on how to do stuff, because
I mean there are like cool stuff. We just
we're
copying the stuff that isn't really working.
Right. Like I think I've always loved adaptive architecture. So when I was in school, we could pick urbanism, adaptive architecture, and then I honestly forget the third one, but it had to do with like new technology in architecture. So I really loved adaptive architecture, and I still do. I love the whole idea of taking something old and restoring it to what it once was without necessarily modernizing it. I worked at a firm once that was like my most enjoyable experience, where we would actually go back. We had a historical architect that worked with us, and she would go into like these archives and she would find the original pictures of what the structures would look like. And then we would try and fix up the building and make it look like it did when it originally was built.
Wow.
So that was really a like amazing experience, just because we were able to like restore a piece of history and make it look old even when it was new. And also like that challenge of having an old space then connecting to a new space. One of like the most iconic examples I can think of in Boston is the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and how they took something really modern and new as an addition and attached it to like this really old historical house that is now a museum. And I just love that type of architecture. And I just think that that's what we should be doing when it comes to modernizing, is restoring the old and then trying to incorporate and blend the history with something new, instead of just like ignoring it or stepping on it and not paying it any mind, like we're seeing a lot of.
I think like in Egypt, we're trying to do this a bit more. Like recently, there's been a lot of people who are just coming forth with ideas like that, like preservation, why it's important, especially in Egypt. It's crazy how much like historical and heritage sites we have. It's crazy, and they're literally trashed and they're not even accessible. And then people just focus on the stuff that everybody knows about. But there's like a lot of things that are more low key, and they're more, just not out there for everybody to know about. So I think recently we've had like several people in Egypt who are trying to work on this, and they're starting like small offices that where it's like super difficult to make profits because things are not really funded. And then I think there's progress. Like many places have recently been opened for visitors, which is a huge step, Yeah, it's nice because I think Egypt kind of lost its identity in terms of architecture, because as I told you, it's been
Yeah.
so influenced by like French architecture and British architecture and like Ottoman architecture and Islamic architecture and Christian architecture. So it's like, what is Egyptian architecture? We have no idea. Like there's an office that started like, I don't know, like 10 years ago, and all they do is just try to figure out what is the Egyptian architecture or identity of Egyptian architecture. And I think it's really challenging. It's crazy, you know. We don't know. We all think of ancient Egyptians, but these are not us, you know.
Yeah.
We are a lot more layered because there's Arabic, there's Christians, there's like a whole different complex identity, and we don't know what it is.
Yeah, that's definitely an important point to know. I feel like whenever I think about Egypt, I think about the pyramids, right?
Yeah,
Like that's what everybody
exactly.
thinks about.
Yeah.
And what is the identity of it? That's a really good question.
Like there's like an area in Egypt, in Cairo, that is so famous. Everybody, like most tourists, like to go there. It's called Zamalek, and it's so French, you know.
Mm.
Like you would feel like you're in Paris. And technically, the person who designed it was like inspired from Paris. You would feel like this is so complex. How do we categorize this?
Mhm. It's
You know?
interesting because it's like we're taught that the Egyptians are like one of the oldest societies, right? Or like one of the oldest cultures in the world. And they're always
Yeah.
finding new things from the Egyptian culture. So to know that it's been so influenced by other cultures is very interesting. Like I never would have actually thought that.
I think like there's also, like you said, a lot of pharaonic or ancient Egyptian architecture in Egypt that you can
Mhm.
find, and it's not really influenced as much. In South Egypt, there are two cities that are just full of temples, and they're like all just super Egyptian, like you know, intensely. But Cairo especially, and Alexandria, because you know, Cairo is the capital city and Alexandria is the port city.
Mhm.
So they're so influenced. Like Alexandria is so influenced by the Romans and the Greeks. It's intense.
All right. I'm just going to switch gears here a little bit. With your education coming to an end, do you have any idea of what's coming next for you? Are you going to rest? Are you going to get a job? Are you going to do content creation? What is your desire when you look ahead in your future and know that you're almost done with your education?
This is a really good question. And I ask myself this question every day because, like, I really have no idea. And I'm usually the kind of person who plans ahead, but I feel so comfortable in the amount of, like, I don't want to say opportunities, but like choices that I can choose. So I kind of don't want to limit myself, but I do see myself like focusing on content creation. I also like work currently as a video content creator in a like an online, you know, news media agency. It's called like Egyptian Streets, and they basically just focus on Egyptian like culture, the small things, you know, the things that just make it Egypt. And it's the main English-based magazine, online magazine. It's like mostly for like tourists or for Egyptians who don't really speak Arabic or who lived abroad their entire life. And it's really fun because I get to put in like the architectural point of view in my videos. So I really do see myself continuing there for a long while. And I also would love to just in parallel working as a teacher assistant in the university. But I'm also like so eager to work in an office. So I don't know how, but that's pretty impossible to just do this as well. But I would love to, and I have no idea how, you know.
Yeah, right. It's hard to balance everything that you want to do. And I think that it
Exactly.
is so cool that architecture is so unbound in the fact that you can do
Yeah.
so much with it. Like I've talked to people who are architectural assistants, so they like just do architectural research, people who are just architectural writers. Like there's so many different avenues you can go down. I think now we're starting to see like how that can translate into this new like media turn that we're in with all
Yeah.
this video content and community building, like how we as architecture specialists sort of fit into that conversation with something so untraditional, because most people think if you're an architect, you're going to go work at a firm, and that's fine. That's what I did, right? Like I have been there. If anybody out here is graduating and wants to jump right into the workforce, that's what I did. But I honestly regret it now that I think about it. Like, I wish that I had taken a break because it's like 5 years of like go, 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 go. And then
Yeah.
I didn't give myself a break. I think I took a month off, which was not enough time.
Yeah.
And I started working. I actually quit my job a month ago and have been figuring out like what I actually want, because I worked in the industry at a small firm and I learned a lot because it was a small firm, and I needed all the knowledge that I learned there, because in the education that I received, I was not taught how to actually put like a building together. We weren't really taught how to do building detailing. It was more artsy, like build a building and make it look pretty, have pretty renderings, put the poster together,
Yeah.
focused on more artsy stuff like that. So when I got into practice, I really needed to learn like actually how to put a building together, the pieces and parts that it took. And so I worked traditionally in a firm for almost 3 years. And then last month, I just decided that it was time to quit my job and start like figuring out of what I actually wanted to do and just allow myself to take the break that I never actually had.
Would you rather like focus on creating content as well?
So I really love creating content. I love talking to people in the community. I think for me, going back to what I loved so much about architecture and what made me stay was the community. So I feel like since I've graduated, I've like lost that sense of community that I felt. And so I really like want to create a lot of content and build communities and be able to connect with people all across the world, just is what I'm doing basically with my platform. And I also really love to teach people. So my whole page is based around architecture through Revit. So
Yeah.
I love Revit. I'm a huge believer in it. And I want to just show people what's possible and allow people to have a mentor as they go through trying to learn this, because a lot of companies, a lot of bigger companies, especially in the United States, require you to know the program, but the universities don't actually teach you the program. So there's
Yeah.
like this huge disconnect that I experienced, and through my own personal like grievances and having to go through the hurdles of that and learn it on my own, now I've realized like I really want to speak about it and help other people. And so I have a course that I've created, a like foundational Revit course where I help someone who basically has never touched the program before, and we learn it together in 3 weeks. So that's what I've been doing. And I've also been trying to do freelance work on the side for 2 other people that I actually, one of them I met through my Instagram profile. So it was really cool to like have somebody find me through my platform and be like, oh my God, like I love what you're doing. And I see that you use Revit every day. And I don't even need your resume because your page is your resume. And it's just so interesting to like see how our society has evolved. Like I was like mind blown. I was like, somebody wants to work with like he like this owner of a firm, and he was like, I am so excited to learn from you. And I was like,
Oh,
me? That's so cool. Like, yeah, some interesting things, fun things coming up. Gonna be doing like the freelance work, and now I'm excited to just have time to build my community and focus on making my course even better than it already was, and just helping people develop their Revit skills so they can feel confident enough to go and get jobs. So that's sort of where I'm at now. It's only been a month, but I've been resting a lot. Like I used to read a lot when I was
great.
in high school, and I didn't read a book for fun at all when I was in college. So now I've been like reading a lot and just relaxing. And I'm like, oh, I need to tell everybody who's about to graduate that they need to give themselves time, because it's like everyone wants to know. Like, I know I asked you what's next, right? Everyone wants to know what's next after someone graduates. And I think that it's really amazing that we get to see people graduate now and go into these unique disciplines of architecture. And even if you don't work at a firm right away, we're all allowed to change our minds, right? I worked at a firm for 2 years. Now I'm changing my mind and doing something different. So even if you start off with what you're doing now, there's nothing to say that in a year you're like, I'm ready to go work in a firm.
Yeah, we need to like kind of try to do the things that we enjoy more,
Mm-hmm.
rather like the things that we're taught that, this is the right choice. This is the thing that you got to do, or this is where you're going to learn the most. So you have to do this. Otherwise, you're not really that good of an architect.
Exactly.
Because we also really have this culture here, like that you need to graduate and work in a firm as a technical working, student just to create technical details, because otherwise you're not really an architect. And this is crazy. 4 months ago, I was like, no, I'm not gonna do this, okay? Because no. And I don't really have a reason, and I'm just gonna do the things that I really enjoy.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna pressure myself to do the things that I don't like because they're good for me.
Yeah. Exactly. 100%, because you could go and do that and it doesn't feel right for you at the end of the day. So that's all that matters. Like, just because everyone says that that's what's right, it's like you could become this leading expert on your Egypt platform that you're working with, your videos, right? You're their architectural expert. Like, just because you're not in a firm doing technical drawings does not validate or invalidate your abilities as an architect, which I think is something that keeps coming up, is like this whole validation cycle of like, I need a professor to validate me, and now I need like my boss or a firm to validate how good I am. And it's like, no, I'm just going to do what makes me happy, and that's going to be the validation.
Exactly. I always see like your account and your posts on Revit, and I'm always thinking like, wow, she does everything on Revit. This is insane. Like, how?
Yep.
Oh my God, this is so cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been using it for 7-8 years now, and
Wow.
it definitely is something that you learn over time. But I feel like there's just such a misconception. Like, I
Yeah.
remember being in school and my teachers were like, don't use Revit. And it was like, our school gave us access to all the programs. And I only got into Revit because my school made us do co-ops or internships in between semesters. So starting sophomore year, after 3 semesters of architecture school, 4th semester, I had to go get a job and work in an architecture firm as like my semester. And the firm I worked at, they used Revit, and they gave us a 2-day Revit training. Like, somebody sat with us for 2 whole days, and we built like this basic box of a hotel shell. But they taught us all the basics, and then we went and we did the standard, red lines that the architects give us. And after that, I was like, wow, like, this program is so powerful. And then I actually went back to school. We had a summer semester, and I used SketchUp for the first time. I was like, my best friend at the time, she knew SketchUp really well, and I wasn't really feeling super confident with Revit. I just used it in the industry, not for school. So I wasn't really modeling. I was just doing detailing, like you were saying, and picking up red lines and things like that, never creating a building on my own. And so for some reason, I got back and was like, yeah, I'm going to use SketchUp because it was 3D. And I'd only been using hand drafting or AutoCAD. So I was like, okay, SketchUp seems a little bit easier. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life because it's just lines and they all have to connect. And I was like, no. And I made the decision. So I had to go through the whole semester using SketchUp because I started my project in it. So I couldn't just not do my project in it anymore. And I guess in terms of, we're going to like talk about grading, it was literally my worst semester. Like, and I don't know if it was because I used SketchUp, but I think it's because I didn't have confidence in what I was using. So then the semester right after that, I was like, I'm going to do this project in Revit, and no one else really in studio was using Revit. Everyone was using Rhino, and Rhino's a great tool, but it's not what architects use in the industry. So it seemed like a waste of my time. And time is so valuable. So I never, ever got into Rhino. I stayed the course my first junior semester with Revit and just watched 1,000 YouTube videos trying to piece together things that I wanted to specifically create, and was able to do that. And so one of my big reasonings now is like, I don't advertise it that much, but I offer one-on-one services. So like, you can hire me to do like 4 1-hour calls or 6 1-hour calls, or whatever package you want to create basically. and I'll work with you on your studio project to bring it to life. So last year was really cool. I got to work with a student. She was doing her thesis in India, and she'd come to me and like sketch something and be like, okay, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I want to create. How do I bring this to life in Revit? And so I would do like a quick little, it wouldn't be to scale, it wouldn't be perfect, but it would be the workflow of how to create the general form and shape she was trying to achieve. And I was like, please use Lumion because I love Lumion and Revit works really well with Lumion. She used Lumion and like it was just so great. She came back to me like a few months later and was like, just so thankful that I was able to help her and support her. And she was like, she was like, I did like the top of my class. She was like, I couldn't even believe it. And I was like, oh my God, like it's just like moments like that where it's like so fulfilling to be able to help somebody bring their project to life and not have to sit and struggle like I did and be like, how do I YouTube? How do I Google what I'm trying to create? What's in my head? It's so difficult to convey that to a search engine and find a video that's remotely related to what you're trying to bring to life. So that's a little bit about like my experiences and just why I've decided to create this platform and create the course and offer the mentorship packages, because I just really want to help people who are in my position. And I just feel like universities don't put enough emphasis on providing support. Like they'll offer programs, and oftentimes the TA is the only support a student gets. And it's like, how can one TA help a class of 12 students? Like it's 1 to 12. So yeah, I just want to offer some less stress in a time of high stress, right? Like it's so stressful as it is, like to be able to offer a helping hand. And that's why I try and give a lot of like educational content. I do workshops every month, like for free in my community, just because I want people to like see what is possible with Revit and that it's not as scary as everyone makes it seem, because it definitely gets a bad rep, I think.
Honestly, that's so great. Like, it's really sweet that you try to just kind of like grab people by their hand and like take them through the process where you like really struggle to find the right videos, to just YouTube tutorials all the time. I know this is really frustrating. Such a hassle to just try to create what you want to do on a program without really knowing everything about the program.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been so amazing hearing about you, hearing about your country, hearing about your studies, and also hearing about just how you're going to be moving forward after this. I'm so excited to see what you do. And yeah, it's going to be so cool to continue to watch you. So I'm excited to keep following along your journey.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And I'm so glad we had this conversation, bridging the gap between Egypt and the US. This is important.
Yes, it is.
And I'm so excited to keep seeing your account and the model and place tools and and Revit. Like, so nice talking to you.
Yes, it was so nice talking to you too. Thank you.